How's it going? Today, I'm going to talk to you about one of DC's most important franchises for a number of different reasons. Now, I'm going to talk about the Green Lantern. The Green Lantern has definitely had its share of roller coaster when it came to quality, writing, and just expressiveness in the genre. And there's some reasons for that. DC's always kind of used Green Lantern as a think tank of ideas. But the original Silver Age run and even the modern era where we start getting into Geoff Johns' writing and all these exciting Green Lantern stories have been some of the most quality sci-fi writing that we've gotten. In the original Silver Age Green Lantern, we see things that you don't see in media prominently for another 30 or 40 years. It was very ahead of its time. However, you also see Hal Jordan calling his best friend Pie Face and all sorts of weird social things that are heavily dated, and it's part of the reason why these comics don't get talked about a lot. So follow along here, and I'm going to run you through a short history of the Green Lantern. So it all starts in Showcase 22. Basically, Hal Jordan is a fighter pilot, like a test fighter pilot. He pilots these little machines to see how planes will do. He does fly and all these things, but he's known for being extremely brave. And while he's testing one of these planes, a green light comes and just abducts him, picks him up, and takes him to a dying alien. And that alien is Abin Sur, the Green Lantern, who had his ring before him. And he basically gives him the lowdown. He's like, hey, I'm a space cop for Sector 2814, and this ring says you have the most willpower and courage on this planet. I need you to become the Green Lantern. Now, this is pretty cool because the original Green Lantern got his powers from magic. And people weren't really expecting this sci-fi turn of events with comics in general. The original Flash got his powers from magic. Everything from the 1940s was just magic, magic, magic. And they kind of begin this 1950s, 60s era where everything's based off science. Now, Green Lantern had a couple more appearances in Showcase and then appeared in the first appearance of the Justice League. So Green Lantern was doing things. He was there, but he didn't have his own issue yet until a couple months later we get Green Lantern #1. Now in Green Lantern #1, the Guardians of the Galaxy are introduced and the idea of a big core, a Green Lantern core is introduced. Vastly different than the original Green Lantern, which was just a solo guy with a magic ring. Now the next couple issues you kind of establish just a pattern, start to finish comic book storytelling perspective of just this bad guy's here, at the end of the issues he's defeated. You do get Hector Hammond, which was the bad guy in the Green Lantern movie, but let's not talk about that because that movie's horrible. And in all these books, the weakness to yellow is established. It seems like the power of the Green Lantern ring cannot affect things that are yellow. Now, the original Green Lantern, his ring could not affect wood. So, you got some pros and some cons there. There's a lot of yellow things out there, but there's a lot of things on Earth made of wood. Which is where Green Lantern's main bad guy comes in at Green Lantern #7, which is the first appearance of Sinestro. Now, Sinestro rules the galaxy through fear. He rules the galaxy through the color yellow. Sinestro was also a former Green Lantern that had had some major disagreements with the Guardians, which basically led him down the path of fear and evil. So now we've got a green ring established and we've got a ring that shoots yellow established. And then we have to establish pink. In Green Lantern 16, Green Lantern's love interest, Carol Ferris, gets possessed by the gem of the Star Sapphire. And the gem of the Star Sapphire basically makes her love terrifying, kind of like that Obsession movie. But it's not a ring. That doesn't come along until way later in the Geoff Johns era. And I can tell you're kind of picking this up here. There's a lot of breadcrumbs here for things that later writers would pick up on and turn into great stories. In Green Lantern 29, we have the first appearance of Black Hand, which is a major villain in Blackest Night. And then in Green Lantern 40, we get the origins of the multiverse and Krona, and the Green Lantern of the Silver Age teams up with the Green Lantern of the Golden Age. Alan Scott and Hal Jordan team up, and this actually kickstarts events that lead to the Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is the end of the multiverse in DC. This major storyline started in a Green Lantern comic book. And there's a lot of really good stories in this run of 1 to 40, and there's a lot of really bad stories in this run to 1 to 40. You know, there's a lot of interesting sci-fi concepts, and Green Lantern's ring really doesn't have like a rule book associated with it. At some points he can turn invisible, at some point he can phase through objects. It's really whatever the guy can think of, but there's not really like a solid format of this ring can do this thing. The only thing that seems abundantly clear about the Green Lantern's ring is it's not strong enough to beat Superman, but it can beat a lot of different things, and it has kind of this like multi-tool purpose that the Justice League can use, to where, you know, Hal Jordan can turn everyone into like different people and make them look different, and it helps, but it's not the end all be all punch through a star or a sun power. So Green Lantern Space Adventures were doing pretty good, and a lot of people were enjoying this like sci-fi uniqueness that the Green Lantern had. Well, the problem is Superman then starts releasing a comic book simultaneously where he goes out in space and travels. So like it stole from the Green Lantern's fan base, and now all these like fans kind of could just go read Superman, because Superman's like Coca-Cola at this point. Green Lantern is, you know, RC Cola or Mountain Dew or something. It's lower down on the tier of popularity. And Green Lantern's starting to have some problems with sales. Now, this is where you get into Guy Gardner, and Guy Gardner is DC think tanking in the Green Lantern to basically try to re-innovate this character. And Guy Gardner's brash, and he says whatever's on his mind, and he's funny. And Hal Jordan wasn't particularly super funny of a guy. He was just very like cool. He was very like willing to do stuff. He had a cool point of view on stuff, but that was getting boring to audiences. So they introduced Guy Gardner as this kind of like counterpart to the ideal. So throughout issues 1 through 75 or so, you've got this just giant alien universe being built pretty much solely by Green Lantern. Most of the other comic books in DC are set in this very grounded Earth that, you know, is of course crazy, and there's tons of superpowers everywhere, but the Green Lanterns are out there exploring tons of Earths like that, tons of planets like that. So yeah, you get some very cool sci-fi, some very cool technologies, some weird sociologies from these different planets, things that writers were thinking of in the 60s and 70s that were really enjoyable. Now, although a lot of these stories were very ethereal and cosmic, and they were constantly these moral dilemmas, there was something about them that wasn't entirely just hooking with audiences every issue. It was kind of one of those DC tropes to where they'd release like 1 or 2 just really good issues, but be followed by like 3 or 4 dry issues. And another thing too was Green Lantern's romance was pretty heavy in the series, and that got a little dry in some parts. Him balancing Carol Ferris, who's also one of his arch nemesises, that, you know, him going through this hand jive constantly. It was different. It was a lot different. As someone who's read most of it, it's not the most common theme you'll find in a comic book, but it's not always the best. There's great issues and there's really bad issues. So Green Lantern actually drops off the shelves for a little while. They're not publishing new Green Lantern books. The sales weren't really hitting it. And the same was happening simultaneously to Green Arrow, which is where DC gets the genius idea to hire Dennis O'Neil to write and Neil Adams to draw. And this was actually one of the more just clear-cut, successful Green Lantern runs that we get. Now, before this, Green Lantern had primarily operated on this like galactic playing field. He would travel throughout Sector 2814, or assist other Green Lanterns or fight in these like multiversal threats. Well, now that he's teamed up with Green Arrow, who's definitely not a cosmic fighter by any means, the guy's just a modern day Robin Hood, he's kind of forced to like stay on the planet. And this is where you get some of the like greatest stories. This issue, these runs, is basically Hal Jordan and Green Arrow taking like road trips across America to fight crime. And this is where you see Green Lantern get that TLC, that tender love and care that DC always needed to give to it. You get Green Lantern 76, No Evil Shall Escape My Sight, which is probably his most memorable cover to this day. You get Snowbirds Don't Fly, and that cover's amazing, but it's the cover where Green Lantern and Green Arrow walk in on Speedy doing heroin. And this series is a two-parter. I've done videos about it before, but it is a wild tale. Thugs end up drugging Green Lantern and Green Arrow. Green Lantern's ring is making constructs while he's high. And the moral of the story kind of like goes down this spiral of like, this is what the youth in America are dealing with nowadays. And for the first time, Green Lantern is actually tackling these political issues on Earth. And they're kind of groundbreaking for the time. Like, people aren't really used to reading about drug abuse in their comic books. People aren't really used to reading about political corruption. They're not used to these, like, kids' stories evolving into, like, a darker theme. So it's really important that these books came out because it made people think for the first time that they can publish things like this in comic books. Which is where you start seeing the seeds planted for more thought-provoking books like Watchmen, Identity Crisis, and, I mean, a lot of books that we read today are these more critical books on our views on society. In this run, you get the first appearance of John Stewart, which is arguably the second most popular Green Lantern. And John Stewart's origins kind of coincide with the themes of this book. You know, he was poor, he was from East St. Louis, he was a Marine that had gotten out of the military, and I believe he wasn't originally a Medal of Honor winner, but they have kind of retconned it to he was a Medal of Honor winner nowadays. But you know, you start seeing the seeds planted. Now there are 3 Green Lanterns from the Ring on Earth. Everything after the Neil Adams run, it gets kind of back to its roots. It's this big, like, space opera, space sci-fi, mess. There's some good in it and there's some bad in it, but it just becomes more like templated. It's not really like amazing, but you still get like these seeds of things that other writers are going to come and use someday. Like you get the first appearance of Necron. Now I'm skipping a big chunk here because, like I said, Green Lantern in this era was just kind of another title. There was nothing really that made it stand out. If it was your book, it was worth reading, but I have always found the 80s Green Lantern kind of hard to read, but I really enjoyed a lot of his appearances in other books. Now that being said, John Stewart and Guy Gardner start getting some appearances in the 80s. You know, you get John Stewart's second appearance in a Justice League title where Hal Jordan slips on a bar of soap and gets knocked out, and this now becomes John Stewart's second appearance. And yes, John Stewart does save Santa Claus on Christmas in this appearance. He's a hero. So we get to the Emerald Twilight of 1994. And this part of Green Lantern's history gets a little rocky, and it has to happen for like the most amazing story that he has. So, in the wake of Superman's death, DC was just kind of sitting there with a loaded revolver and was like, who else isn't selling? Like, Green Lantern hasn't sold enough books recently. Let's pow! So, they send Cyborg Superman and Mongrel to Coast City, and they destroy it. And Green Lantern fights them, and he finally fights them all off. And in their wake, Coast City is destroyed. Now, Green Lantern uses his ring to try to resurrect the city, and the Guardians of the Galaxy stop him. They're like, you cannot use your ring for personal gains like that. And this upsets him, and he goes on a killing spree and literally kills the entire Green Lantern Corps. Everyone is dead. Now, his ring, he throws it off at the end and just dives into the Green Lantern power battery on Oa and absorbs all of its energy. And when he comes out, he calls himself Parallax. Now, later this is retconned that apparently a yellow entity, like the entity of yellow, the entity of fear, was prisoned within the Green Lantern power battery, but that did not come out until at least 12 years later. That was something that Geoff Johns did to save Green Lantern face. So Ganthet takes Hal Jordan's old ring and removes some of the impurities and weaknesses of it, doesn't need to be charged anymore, all these things, and gives it to an artist by the name of Kyle Rayner. And Kyle Rayner can now use the ring willingly, and Green Lantern sales go up for a little while. And for a couple of years, Hal Jordan was this looming dark figure rolling around in the galaxy, just beating up everyone for no reason, until one day Earth's sun starts dying, and he uses all the power he'd absorbed from the Lantern battery to keep the sun alive. Hal Jordan dies, and because of his life was filled with so much black and white and good and bad, he is chose to redeem himself and become the new Spectre. Now this is taking the mantle from Jim Corrigan, which was the first Spectre, and if you read Spectre, Jim Corrigan was amazing. But yeah, Hal Jordan becomes the second Spectre, and they don't really use him a lot. You know, he kind of comes and goes throughout the comic books. He's kind of like a plot device that can be used when battles just aren't winnable. But compared to the first Spectre, who was literally fighting the Anti-Monitor in the Crisis on Infinite Earths, we don't really get the utilization of Hal Jordan's Spectre nearly as much. But we get about 12 years where other Green Lanterns get their time to shine, they get their time in the spotlight, and there's a little bit of diversity through the Green Lanterns, and they become just kind of like the staple B character. Now, a lot of people did not like the fact that they did this to Hal Jordan, because Hal Jordan's willpower, who he is, just didn't really ever come across as the guy that could just snap and mass murder everyone because he had a bad day. But DC was on one, and they just kind of felt like it was time for him to go. And then we get to the gift that never stopped giving, Geoff Johns. Geoff Johns got put in charge of Green Lantern, and the first thing he did was write Green Lantern Rebirth. Now, Green Lantern Rebirth took all of these concepts that had been just kind of dropped on us over the past 50 years and turned them into something that made sense. It took forever for someone to do it. And this story ties together all of the Lanterns that had been established on Earth. You've got John Stewart, Guy Gardner, Kyle Rayner, all there, and they're all experiencing like their own version of Hal Jordan coming back. Even Kilowog is a big part of this book. And they retcon a lot of these ideas. Now they're adding this idea of Parallax was the entity of fear in the yellow ring, or that comes from the yellow energy. He is like the harbinger of yellow. He is the avatar of yellow. And they had hidden him inside of the Green Lantern battery, and when Hal Jordan experienced this great grief, it opened up a gateway for Parallax to possess him. Hal Jordan gets resurrected. The Spectre, resides from his soul. He becomes Green Lantern again. And we begin the greatest arc that Green Lantern's ever had, which is the Geoff Johns era. So Geoff Johns realized something. There's more than 3 colors. There's more than green, yellow, and pink. And he did this thing that seemed so obvious to fans. He made lanterns for every color. Now, you would think that somewhere in the 80s, someone would have been like, hey, we should throw a Red Lantern in for this one issue and just see how it goes. But no, no one had ever thought about this from the entire writing cycles of Green Lantern. They'd always kept him in his respective safe zone. And this is important because Geoff Johns' Rebirth went through 4 prints. It was one of the biggest selling comics at the time. Now, it didn't outsell like Batman or Spider-Man or anything, but it was topping the charts. And this was a Green Lantern book. No one had really expected it. And this success really carried on for the rest of Geoff Johns' run in the Green Lantern storytelling universe. And now these characters that had such small parts to play can expand farther. Now Sinestro has developed his own corps of lanterns, of yellow lanterns, where before Sinestro was just one guy who was a problem, and he was kind of milking the entire yellow entity, all of its power for himself. We see the Star Sapphires get retconned from a Star Sapphire gem to apparently now there's a planet of Star Sapphire. And this all leads into Blackest Night, which is where the Black Lantern rings come and take over anyone who's ever died before in the comic books. And if the Black Lanterns kill you, they can give you a lantern. Amazing storytelling, and this turns out to be one of DC's biggest selling books of all time. Hey, so if you're excited as I am for the new Lanterns show and maybe for Green Lantern to get some love, go ahead and like and subscribe. I do plan to do a more in-depth video about the entire writing cycle that Geoff Johns had, and even one about Neil Adams and breaking things down more. But this was just kind of something to get people who are interested in Green Lantern bought into the ideals, because he is one of the better comic book characters. And yeah, I plan to release more, and thank you for watching.